Colt Mercer built his Wyoming ranch on silence and distance, two things a mail-order bride would destroy. But when Eliza Whitmore steps off that stagecoach in tears, her reputation already in ruins, he makes a choice that shocks them both. What starts as a transaction becomes something far more dangerous: trust. In a land where survival demands strength and secrets can kill, two broken people must decide if the truth is worth the risk or if some wounds cut too deep to heal. Stay with us until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The Wyoming wind carried dust and doubt in equal measure. Colt Mercer stood on the platform of Clearwater Station, hat pulled low, watching the stagecoach lumber toward him like a judgment he'd been putting off for months. The wood beneath his boots was worn smooth by a decade of arrivals and departures. Mostly departures. People didn't stay in Clearwater unless they had no choice or no sense. He had both. The stage rolled to a stop with a groan of axles and a cloud of prairie grit. The driver, a weathered man named Dutch who'd been running this route since before the war, climbed down with the stiffness of someone who'd spent too many hours on a hard bench. "Mercer," Dutch said, nodding once. "Dutch." "She's inside, been quiet most of the ride." Colt didn't respond. He kept his eyes on the coach door, which remained closed. Around them, the platform had drawn a small crowd. Nothing official, just the usual handful of idle men and curious shopkeepers who treated the twice-weekly stage like theater. In a town of 200 souls, any new arrival was entertainment. The door finally opened. The woman who emerged wasn't what he'd expected, though he'd been careful not to expect much. The letters had been practical, almost clinical. Age 26. Educated? No family. Seeking honest work and honest partnership. He'd written back in the same spirit. Ranch needs managing. Life is hard. Weather is harder. If you can read and work, that's enough. But the woman stepping down wasn't the stern, capable figure he'd imagined. She was small. Too small, his first thought, with dark hair pinned back in a style that had probably been neat when she'd started this journey, but now hung loose in tired strands. Her dress was dark blue, travel-stained, and she clutched a single carpet bag like it held everything she owned. Probably did. It was her face that stopped him. She'd been crying. Not recent tears, these were the dried tracks of hours of weeping, the kind that left marks. Her eyes, when they met his, were red-rimmed and wary, the look of someone who'd learned to expect the worst and was rarely disappointed. The crowd noticed. He heard the whispers start immediately, that low buzz of small-town judgment. "That her? Looks like she's been through it. Wonder what she's running from." Colt's jaw tightened. He'd forgotten this part. How fast talk moved, how little it took to start tongues wagging. In the 3 years since he'd come back from the war and bought this land, he'd managed to keep clear of most of it by staying clear of town. But standing here on this platform with a crying woman and a dozen watching eyes, he felt that old familiar trap closing in. The woman, Eliza, her name was Eliza Whitmore, descended the last step and stood there, looking at him with something close to terror, poorly hidden behind exhausted dignity. "Mr. Mercer?" Her voice was quiet but clear, educated. The letters hadn't lied about that. "Miss Whitmore." "Mrs.?" she corrected, then caught herself. "I mean, Miss. It's Miss now. I was married briefly, but he—" She stopped, her composure cracking. "I apologize. The journey was long." He could see her trying to hold herself together, could see the effort it cost. Around them, the whispers grew louder. Someone laughed. Not at anything funny, just that nervous sound people made when they sensed drama coming. Colt made a decision. "Dutch, I'll settle the fare." "Already paid," Dutch said, eyeing the woman with something between pity and curiosity. "She took care of it in Cheyenne." "Right." Colt reached for her bag. She pulled back instinctively, then forced herself to let go. Her hands were shaking. "This all you got?" "Yes." One bag. Whatever she'd left behind, she'd left most of it. He turned toward where he'd tied his horse and the small wagon he used for supply runs. The crowd was still watching, still whispering. He could feel Eliza Whitmore walking behind him, could sense how much effort it took her to keep her spine straight, her chin up. Pride was a funny thing. Sometimes it was all that held a person together. "Mr. Mercer." He stopped, turned back. She'd halted a few steps behind, her face pale. I need to tell you something before we go any further. Here it comes, he thought. Whatever she'd been running from was about to spill out right here on this platform with half the town watching. Not here, he said. You deserve to know. Not here, he repeated, firmer this time. He glanced past her at the watching faces, then back to her eyes. We'll talk on the road. Come on. For a moment he thought she might refuse, might insist on unburdening herself right there in front of everyone. But something in his tone, or maybe just exhaustion, made her nod. She followed him to the wagon. He helped her up onto the bench seat, then climbed up beside her. The wagon springs creaked under their combined weight. He picked up the reins, released the brake, and guided the horse away from the station. Behind them, the whispers followed like smoke. They'd gone maybe half a mile before she spoke again. I need to explain why I was crying. Don't need to explain tears to me, Colt said, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. Everybody cries eventually. Not like that. Not... She stopped, drew a breath. The letters I wrote you weren't lies, but they weren't the whole truth either. Figured as much. That seemed to surprise her. She turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time. He kept his gaze forward, giving her space to study him without being studied back. He knew what she'd see. A man in his early 30s, weathered beyond his years, with the kind of quiet that came from spending more time with animals than people. His clothes were clean, but worn, practical. His hands on the reins were scarred from work and other things he didn't talk about. You expected me to lie? She asked. Expected you to leave things out, same as I did. What did you leave out? That I'm not much for talking, that the ranch is further from town than the letters made it sound, that I've got a temper when I'm pushed, though I keep it under control. He paused. That I went to war and came back different, and the woman I was supposed to marry decided different wasn't what she wanted. The honesty seemed to shake something loose in her. He saw her hands unclench slightly from where they'd been gripping each other in her lap. I was a school teacher, she said, in Philadelphia. I had a good position, a good reputation. There was a man, a wealthy man, influential, who decided he wanted me. I refused him. Politely at first, then less politely when he persisted. Colt said nothing, but his hands tightened on the reins. He didn't take rejection well. He spread rumors, lies about my character, about inappropriate conduct with students, about... Her voice wavered. It didn't matter that none of it was true. He had money and connections. I had nothing. The school board dismissed me. Other schools wouldn't hire me. His lies followed me everywhere I tried to go. So you came west. So I ran west, she corrected. I'm not proud of running, but staying meant watching my life get smaller and smaller until there was nothing left. Coming here, answering your advertisement, it felt like the only door that hadn't been slammed shut. The road ahead of them stretched empty and long, cutting through grassland that rolled like a frozen ocean under the late afternoon sun. To the west, the mountains rose up purple and distant, indifferent to human trouble. The crying, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, was because I realized something on that stagecoach. I realized that I was about to do to you what was done to me, arrive under false pretenses, bring scandal and suspicion into your life without giving you a choice. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't be that person. Colt pulled the wagon to a stop. They were alone out here, nothing but prairie and sky, and the distant cry of a hawk riding the thermals. You planning to leave? He asked. I'm planning to give you the choice I never got. If you want to turn this wagon around and take me back to that station, I'll understand. I can work, save money, move on to somewhere else. But I won't trap you in this. He studied her face, really studied it this time. She looked back at him steadily, despite the fear he could see trembling beneath her surface. Whatever else she wasn't a coward. Running from lies wasn't the same as running from truth. What's your full name? He asked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. Eliza Ann Whitmore. How old are you really? 26, like I wrote. That wasn't a lie. You got any skills besides teaching? I can cook, clean, manage household accounts. I can read and write and do figures. I'm not afraid of work. You afraid of isolation? She hesitated. I don't know. I've never experienced real isolation, but I think I might prefer it to what I've been experiencing. Constant scrutiny, constant judgment. Colt nodded slowly. He released the brake and got the wagon moving again. Wait, she said. What are you doing? Taking you to the ranch. But I just told you. You told me the truth. That's more than most people manage. He kept his eyes on the road. Out here, Miss Whitmore, we don't have the luxury of caring much about what happened back east. A man's reputation, or a woman's, is built by what they do, not what people say about them. You want to prove you're honest and capable, you'll get that chance. You want to run again? You can do that too. But you'll do it from the ranch after you've had time to rest and think clear. You're not concerned about the scandal? He almost laughed. Scandal. In Clearwater, scandal is when someone's cow gets loose and tramples the mercantile owner's vegetable garden. Whatever happened in Philadelphia might as well be on the moon for all it matters here. People in town were already whispering. People in town always whisper. Give them a week. They'll find something new to whisper about. They rode in silence for a while. The sun was dropping lower, painting the grassland gold and amber. In the distance, Colt could see the first fence line that marked his property, another mile to the ranch house from there. Why are you being kind to me? Eliza asked finally. Not being kind. Being practical. I need help running that ranch, and you need a place where your past doesn't matter. That's business, not kindness. It feels like kindness. Then you've been around the wrong people. She didn't argue with that. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low rise. It wasn't much to look at. A single-story structure built from local timber and stone. Functional rather than pretty. Nearby stood a barn in slightly better repair, a small bunkhouse that had been empty since his hired hand left last spring, and a scattering of outbuildings for tools and storage. Fences marked off pastures where his small herd of cattle grazed, and beyond that, the land stretched on for acres he'd claimed and was still learning to manage. This is it, he said, not bothering to make it sound impressive. Eliza was quiet, taking it all in. He tried to see it through her eyes, the isolation, the roughness, the sheer amount of work visible in every direction. A woman from Philadelphia, used to city life and society, might see only deprivation and hardship. It's honest, she said finally. He glanced at her, surprised. She was looking at the house with an expression he couldn't quite read. It's exactly what you described in your letters. No false promises, no pretty lies, just what it is. That a problem? No. She turned to him, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that stagecoach, something like hope flickered across her face. No, Mr. Mercer. I think that might be exactly what I need. He drove the wagon up to the house and helped her down. Evening was settling in now, the temperature dropping with the sun. He grabbed her carpet bag and led her inside. The interior was as plain as the exterior. A main room that served as kitchen and living space, 2 small bedrooms, a stone fireplace that was the heart of the house during winter. Everything was clean but sparse. The home of a man who viewed possessions as either useful or wasteful with no middle ground. You'll take the south bedroom, he said, nodding toward one of the doors. I'm in the north. Kitchen's basic but functional. Water pumps outside, privies behind the barn. We get supplies in town twice a month, more often if weather allows. Eliza set down her bag and turned slowly, taking in the space. He watched her, trying to gauge her reaction. This was the moment when most women would realize what they'd signed up for, when the reality of frontier life would hit them like a cold wind. Where do you keep the household accounts? She asked. Of all the questions she might have asked, that wasn't one he'd expected. What? You mentioned in your letters that the ranch finances need better organization. I assume you keep records of expenses, sales, purchases? Got a ledger in that desk there. Haven't updated it in a while. May I see it? He retrieved the ledger and handed it to her. She opened it, flipped through a few pages, and he saw her expression shift from polite interest to genuine focus. Her finger traced down columns of his rough handwriting, his haphazard attempts at bookkeeping. You're losing money on feed purchases, she said. What? Here. She pointed to an entry from 3 months back. You're buying hay at premium prices in winter when you could purchase bulk in late summer and store it. And these tool replacements, you're buying new instead of repairing. That's expensive. Colt moved closer to look over her shoulder. He'd never thought much about the pattern of his expenses, just spent what needed spending when it needed spending. I work with what I got, he said, a bit defensive. I'm not criticizing, I'm observing. If you want help managing the ranch, this is part of it. A ranch isn't just cattle and land, it's economics, planning, strategy. He stepped back, studying her with new appreciation. They teach that in school teaching? They teach it in survival. My father managed a small business before he died. He taught me that being poor means you can't afford to waste anything, especially money. She closed the ledger carefully. I can help with this if you'll let me. That's why you're here. No. She met his eyes directly. I'm here because I had nowhere else to go. But I can make myself useful while I'm here. That much I can promise. They stood there in the fading light, two people whose lives had brought them to this unlikely intersection. Colt felt something shift in him, some calculation recalibrating. He'd expected to have to teach her, to spend months bringing her up to speed on ranch life. But maybe she'd teach him a few things too. You hungry? He asked. Starving. I'll make dinner. You settle in, wash up if you want. We'll eat, and then I'll show you around properly tomorrow when there's light. She nodded, picked up her bag, and headed toward the south bedroom. She paused at the door. Mr. Mercer? Yeah? Thank you for not turning the wagon around. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen how hard the work is. I'm not afraid of hard work. What are you afraid of? She considered the question seriously. Failing again. Being defined by someone else's lies for the rest of my life. Discovering I'm not as strong as I think I am. Then we got that in common, he said. She smiled slightly, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and disappeared into the bedroom. Colt stood alone in the main room, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling, the wind outside, the distant lowing of cattle. He'd lived in silence for 3 years, and he told himself he preferred it that way. Now there was someone else moving around in the next room, bringing new sounds and presence into his carefully ordered solitude. He wasn't sure if he'd made a good decision or a terrible one. Time would tell. It always did. He started dinner. Nothing fancy, just beans and salt pork with cornbread he'd made that morning. While the food warmed, he found himself listening to the sounds from the south bedroom. Water being poured from the pitcher he'd left there. Footsteps, light and careful. The soft sound of someone unpacking a single bag containing everything they owned. When Eliza emerged 20 minutes later, she'd changed into a simpler dress, dark gray and practical, and had repinned her hair. The tear tracks were washed away, though her eyes still carried that exhausted redness. She looked around the kitchen area with interest. You cook for yourself? She asked. Have been for 3 years. Any good at it? I'm alive, so it must be adequate. She smiled at that, moved to the basin, and washed her hands without being asked. What can I do? Sit. First night, you're a guest. I'm not a guest, Mr. Mercer. I'm a partner in an arrangement. Might as well start acting like it. He handed her plates and utensils. Set the table, then. They worked in companionable silence, preparing the small table that stood near the fireplace. The meal was ready quickly. His cooking never took long, being more about function than flavor, and they sat down across from each other. Eliza took a bite of the cornbread, chewed thoughtfully. This is good. Don't lie to be polite. I'm not lying. It's dense and it's a bit salty, but it's well made. Better than the boarding house food I've been eating for the past 2 months. They ate quietly for a while. Colt found himself acutely aware of the strangeness of having someone across the table from him, of the small sounds of another person eating, of the presence that filled what had been empty space. It wasn't unpleasant, just unfamiliar. Tell me about the ranch, Eliza said. How many head of cattle? 42 right now. Started with 10 3 years ago. That's good growth. Could be better. Lost some to winter, some to predators. Haven't had the manpower to expand like I wanted. What about crops? Don't do much crop farming. Land's better suited for grazing. I keep a kitchen garden, but that's about it. Who helps you? Nobody currently. Had a hired man for a while, but he moved on last spring. Been managing alone since then. She frowned. One man running a ranch this size? I manage. Barely, I'd guess. She took another bite, thinking. You need help. Real help, not just household management. That's why I sent for a mail-order bride instead of just hiring a housekeeper. The bluntness of it hung in the air between them. Eliza set down her fork carefully. We should discuss that, the terms of our arrangement. Figured we'd get to it eventually. I'd rather get to it now while we're both clear-headed. She folded her hands on the table, her teacher's posture returning. You sent for a bride. I answered as a bride. But I need to know what you expect from that word. Colt sat back, considering his answer. I expect partnership. Someone who can help run this place, make it profitable, build something that lasts. I expect honesty and hard work. I expect loyalty. Not the romantic kind necessarily, but the kind where we've got each other's backs when things get difficult. And marriage? I'm not in a rush if you're not. Way I see it, we're strangers right now. Marriage is a legal thing, makes sense for property and protection, but I'm not going to demand it on any particular timeline. We work together, see if we can stand each other, decide from there. What about other expectations? She didn't blush, but her voice tightened slightly. Physical expectations. He'd known this was coming, but still didn't enjoy it. I'm not going to force anything on you if that's what you're worried about. When and if you're ready for that part of being married, you let me know. Until then, you're safe here. You got my word on that. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for lies or hidden meanings. He let her look, kept his expression open. All right, she said finally, then here's what I expect. I expect to be treated as an equal partner in this enterprise, not as hired help or property. I expect to have my opinions heard even if they're not always followed. I expect to be allowed to grow, to learn new skills, to become more than what I was. And I expect honesty, always, even when it's difficult. Sounds fair, does it? Because I'm also bringing debt into this arrangement. Small debt, but it exists. The stagecoach fare wasn't fully paid. I owe another $15. And I have nothing to contribute financially. No dowry, no savings. Don't need your money, need your work. Still, you should know what you're getting. A woman with nothing but a ruined reputation and a carpetbag full of worn-out dresses. And an education, and the ability to see that I'm wasting money on hay purchases. He finished his dinner, pushed the plate aside. Way I figure it, we're both bringing deficits to this arrangement. You got a damaged past, I got a damaged present. Maybe together we can build something that's not damaged. That's optimistic for a man who claims not to be kind. Not optimistic, practical. Two people working together can do more than two people working alone. That's mathematics, not optimism. She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. I think I'm going to like working with you, Mr. Mercer. Colt, we're going to be partners. Might as well use first names. Eliza, then. Eliza. He tested the name, found it fit the woman across from him better than Miss Whitmore had. Finish your dinner. You look like you're about to fall asleep in your plate. I'm exhausted, she admitted. The journey was long and I didn't sleep well most nights. Bed's clean, mattresses decent. You should rest. She helped him clean up despite his protests that she should go straight to bed. They worked side by side at the basin, washing and drying dishes, establishing a rhythm without discussing it. When everything was put away, she paused at the door to her room. Colt? Yeah? I meant what I said earlier about being afraid of failing. But I want you to know, I'm going to do everything I can to make this work, to prove I'm worth the chance you're giving me. Don't prove anything to me. Prove it to yourself. She nodded and slipped into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Colt stood in the empty main room, listening to the house settle around him. Through the thin walls, he could hear Eliza moving around, preparing for bed. The sounds were strange and familiar all at once. He'd grown up in a house full of people before the war, before everything changed. He'd forgotten what it was like to share space with someone. He banked the fire, checked that the doors were latched, and headed to his own room. Sleep came slowly, his mind turning over the events of the day. He'd expected today to be simple. Pick up a practical woman who needed work, bring her back to the ranch, start establishing a working relationship. Instead, he'd gotten Eliza Whitmore, complicated, educated, running from a past that wasn't her fault, and somehow already seeing the ranch's problems more clearly than he did. In the morning, everything would begin. The real work, the real test of whether this arrangement could function. But tonight, lying in his bed and listening to the wind outside, Colt allowed himself a moment of something he rarely indulged in. Hope. Maybe this would work. Maybe two damaged people could build something whole. Maybe the past didn't have to dictate the future. Or maybe it would all fall apart. And in 6 months she'd be gone, and he'd be alone again, with nothing to show for it but the memory of a woman who'd arrived in tears and left in disappointment. Time would tell. It always did. In the south bedroom, Eliza lay awake on clean sheets in a house that smelled of wood smoke and prairie wind. Her body ached from days of travel, her mind spun with exhaustion and anxiety, but underneath it all, something new stirred. Possibility. For the first time in months, she wasn't just running from something. She was running toward something, a chance to rebuild, to prove that she was more than the lies that had been told about her. A chance to work, to use her mind and her hands, to become someone new in a place where the past held no power. She thought about this man in the next room, this Colt Mercer, who'd surprised her with honesty instead of judgment. He was rough around the edges, clearly more comfortable with animals than people, carrying his own damage from a war he didn't talk about. But he'd given her choice when he could have demanded compliance. He'd offered partnership when he could have insisted on subservience. That meant something. Tomorrow she would begin to earn her place here. She would learn the ranch, master its rhythms, prove her worth through action rather than words. She would transform herself from Eliza Whitmore, disgraced teacher, into someone new, someone stronger, someone who couldn't be broken by lies. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside the house it was warm and safe. Eliza closed her eyes and let sleep finally claim her, carrying her down into dreams of wide-open spaces and second chances, of a future that was hers to build from the ground up. In the main room, the fire burned down to embers, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The house stood solid against the prairie night, sheltering two people who'd found themselves at the edge of the world with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Morning would come with its challenges and demands, but tonight, for the first time in a long time, both Colt and Eliza slept without fear. The ranch waited, patient and demanding, ready to test them both. And somewhere in the darkness, the future began to take shape. Dawn came cold and sharp, light spilling through the bedroom window and pulling Eliza from sleep that had been deeper than she'd expected. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling was unfamiliar, the sounds wrong. Then memory rushed back. Wyoming, the ranch, Colt Mercer. She sat up, her body protesting after days on the stagecoach followed by the wagon ride. Outside, she could hear movement, boots on wood, the creak of the barn door, low voices speaking to animals. Colt was already up and working. She dressed quickly in the same gray dress from last night, pinned her hair back with practiced efficiency, and emerged from the bedroom. The main room was empty, the fire freshly stoked and a pot of coffee sitting on the stove. She poured herself a cup, grateful, and stood at the window watching the yard. Colt was at the barn with two horses, checking their hooves with methodical care. His movements were economical, no wasted motion, the work of someone who'd done these tasks 1,000 times. As she watched, he straightened, seemed to sense her eyes on him, and looked toward the house. Their gazes met across the distance. He nodded once, then returned to his work. Eliza finished her coffee and went outside. The morning air bit at her face and hands, colder than anything she'd experienced in Philadelphia. Her breath came in visible puffs. She wrapped her arms around herself and crossed the yard to where Colt was working. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Good morning. How long have you been up?" "Since before light. Animals don't care about sleep schedules." "What needs doing?" Now he did look up, studying her. "You ever worked with horses?" "No." "Cattle?" "No." "Chickens?" "I've eaten them. Does that count?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Might have been a smile, hard to tell. "Not really. Can you carry water?" "Yes." "Then start with the chickens, coops behind the barn. They need fresh water and feed. Feeds in the bin by the door should be labeled." She found the chicken coop easily enough, a sturdy structure that housed about a dozen hens and one rooster who eyed her with deep suspicion. The birds scattered when she entered, squawking their displeasure at the intrusion. She located the feed bin, measured out what seemed like a reasonable amount based on the container's instructions, and scattered it in the feeding area. The chickens rushed forward, their earlier alarm forgotten in the face of breakfast. The water was trickier. The old water was frozen solid in the trough. She had to break the ice with a stick, haul out the chunks, then make 3 trips to the pump to refill it. By the time she finished, her hands were numb and her dress was splattered with mud, and worse. Colt appeared at the coop door as she was making her final inspection. "Found everything?" "I think so. Is this enough feed?" He glanced at the scattered grain. "That's about right. They give you any trouble?" The rooster looks like he's considering murder, but he kept his distance. "That's Sergeant. He's all threat, no follow-through. The hens are the real bosses." He stepped inside, checking her work with a quick, assessing eye. "Water's good. You break that ice yourself?" "Yes." "Could have asked for help." You were busy. I managed. He looked at her hands, red and raw from the cold water. You'll want gloves. There's extra pairs in the mudroom by the back door. Winter. Here'll tear up your skin if you're not careful. I'll remember that. They walked back toward the house together. The sun was fully up now, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. In the distance, cattle moved slowly across the pasture, dark shapes against the pale grass. What's next? Eliza asked. Breakfast. Then I need to ride out and check the fence line on the north section. Been having trouble with brakes. Can I come with you? He stopped, turned to face her. You ride? No, but I can learn. Not today. Riding takes practice, and I need to cover ground fast. You'd slow me down. He said it matter-of-factly, not cruel, just honest. Better if you stay here, get familiar with the house and the close-in work. There's plenty to do. Disappointment flickered through her, but she pushed it down. He was right. She'd be a liability on horseback, and the ranch couldn't afford delays because she wanted to prove something. What needs doing here? Kitchen garden needs harvesting before the next freeze. Root vegetables, mostly. Then there's mending. I've got a pile of clothes that need attention. And if you're serious about the accounts, the ledger's yours. Breakfast was quick. Eggs from the chickens she'd just fed, more cornbread, coffee that could strip paint. They ate efficiently, without much conversation. Colt seemed to retreat into himself in the morning, speaking only when necessary. Eliza found she didn't mind. The silence was comfortable, not hostile. After breakfast, Colt saddled his horse, a big roan gelding named Cooper, and rode out toward the northern fence line. Eliza watched him go, horse and rider moving across the prairie until they were just a dark speck against the horizon, then nothing. The silence that followed was profound. No city sounds, no voices, no traffic, just wind and the occasional call of a bird. For a moment, the isolation pressed in on her, vast and overwhelming. Then she shook herself and got to work. The kitchen garden was small but well-maintained, tucked behind the house where it had some protection from the worst of the wind. She found a basket in the mudroom and began harvesting. Carrots, turnips, parsnips, their tops frostbitten but the roots still good. The work was physical and grounding, dirt under her fingernails, the smell of earth and growing things. By midday, she had 3 baskets full and her back was aching. She hauled everything inside and began the work of sorting, cleaning, and storing. The root cellar was well organized, cooler than the house but not freezing, with neat shelves waiting for winter stores. She arranged the vegetables carefully, making mental notes about quantities and varieties. While her hands worked, her mind wandered. She thought about Philadelphia, about the school where she'd taught for 4 years. She'd loved that work, the challenge of reaching students, of making difficult concepts clear, of watching understanding dawn in young faces. She'd been good at it too, good enough that the headmaster had hinted at a permanent position, at advancement. Then Richard Thornton had noticed her. Even now, the memory made her hands clench. He'd been a member of the school board, wealthy and influential, married to a woman who spent most of her time in Boston visiting family. He'd started with compliments, then invitations to cultural events, then increasingly direct propositions. When she'd refused, politely, then firmly, then bluntly, he'd smiled and told her she was making a mistake. 2 weeks later, the rumors started. She'd been inappropriate with a male student. She'd been seen in compromising situations. Her moral character was questionable. All lies, all carefully crafted to ruin her without leaving fingerprints. The headmaster had called her into his office, apologetic but firm. The board had voted. She was dismissed, effective immediately. She tried to fight it, tried to defend herself. But Thornton had connections, money, power. She had nothing. Other schools wouldn't hire her. The rumors followed her everywhere. Finally, broken and desperate, she'd seen Colt's advertisement in a newspaper someone had left at the boarding house. Seeking practical woman for Western Ranch, hard work, honest partnership. No need for fine manners or society connections. It had felt like a lifeline. Eliza finished storing the vegetables and moved to the pile of mending Colt had mentioned. It was substantial. Shirts with torn seams, trousers with worn knees, socks with holes. She sat up near the window where the light was good and began to work. The sewing was meditative, needle and thread moving in practiced rhythm. Her mother had insisted she learn proper needlework, though Eliza had always preferred books. Now she was grateful for the skill. Each repair was small but necessary, the kind of work that kept a household running. She was halfway through a shirt repair when she heard horses approaching. She looked up, expecting Colt, but saw instead two riders she didn't recognize. Her stomach tightened. She set down the mending and moved to the door. The men pulled up in the yard, both middle-aged, weathered, dressed in work clothes. One was stocky with a graying beard, the other lean and sharp-eyed. They saw her in the doorway and exchanged glances. "Help you?" Eliza called, keeping her voice steady. "Looking for Mercer," the bearded one said. "He around?" "He's checking fence line. Should be back by afternoon." "You must be the wife he sent for." It wasn't quite a question, and there was something in his tone that made her spine straighten. "I'm Eliza Whitmore." "Jim Crawford," the bearded man said, nodding toward his companion. "This here's Pete Dixon. We run the spread east of here." "Pleased to meet you." "Saw you come in yesterday," Dixon said, his sharp eyes taking in everything about her. "On the stage. Caused quite a stir in town." "Did it?" "Woman crying like that, arriving alone. People talk." "People always talk," Eliza said, borrowing Colt's words from yesterday. "Is there a message you want me to give Mr. Mercer?" Crawford shifted in his saddle. "Just being neighborly. Wanted to stop by, welcome you to the territory. It's rough country for women. Not many last long out here." "I appreciate the concern." "That Eastern accent," Dixon observed. "Philadelphia?" Her jaw tightened. "Yes. Long way from home." "This is home now." "If you say so." Dixon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just seems odd, educated woman like you ending up all the way out here. Makes a man wonder what you're running from." Crawford shot his companion a warning look, but the damage was done. Eliza felt the familiar surge of anger and shame, the same combination that had followed her from Philadelphia. "I'm not running from anything," she said, voice cold. "I'm running toward something. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. I'll tell Mr. Mercer you stopped by." She stepped back inside and closed the door, not quite slamming it, but close. Through the window, she watched the two men exchange words, then ride off. Her hands were shaking. So it was going to follow her even here. The suspicion, the judgment, the assumption that a woman alone must have done something wrong. She'd been naive to think distance would matter. She forced herself to breathe, to unclench her fists. Then she returned to her mending with focused intensity, driving the needle through fabric like she was fighting back against something she couldn't name. Colt returned in late afternoon, Cooper lathered and tired. Eliza was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard him come in. She waited while he unsaddled the horse and tended to it, giving him time to finish his work. When he finally entered the house, he looked exhausted. "Find the fence break?" she asked. "Found 3. Cattle had pushed through, wandered onto Crawford's land. Had to round them up and repair the fence." He poured water from the pitcher, drank deeply. "Lost half the day to it." "Crawford was here." Colt's head came up. "When?" "Midday. Him and Pete Dixon. Said they were being neighborly." "What'd they want?" "To look at me mostly. To ask questions about why I'm here." She kept her voice level. "Dixon implied I must be running from something." Colt's expression darkened. "What'd you say?" "That I wasn't running from anything. Then I told them I had work to do and closed the door." "Good." He set down the cup. "Crawford's all right. Mostly keeps to himself. Dixon's got a mouth on him. Likes to gossip. Don't pay him any mind." "Is that what you did? When people talked about you after the war?" The question hung in the air between them. Colt was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah," he said finally. "Came back different, like I told you. People had opinions about that. Some thought I should have stayed back east. Shouldn't have claimed land out here. Said a man who'd seen what I'd seen wasn't fit for civilized company." His jaw tightened. "Took about a year before they got tired of talking and left me alone." "A year," Eliza repeated. "Give or take. You want people to stop wondering about you, you stop giving them things to wonder about. Work hard, keep your head down, prove you belong. Eventually they'll find someone else to gossip about." "That's your advice? Just endure it?" "That's reality. You can fight it, waste energy trying to change people's minds, or you can just outlast it. Up to you." It wasn't the comfort she'd been looking for, but it had the ring of truth. She turned back to the stove, stirring the stew she'd made from salt pork and the vegetables she'd harvested. "How'd the rest of your day go?" Colt asked, changing the subject. "Harvested the garden, stored everything in the root cellar, started on your mending." You didn't have to do all that today. You said there was plenty to do. I did it. He pulled out the ledger from the desk, flipped through it. You made notes. Yes, I found discrepancies in your accounting. Some charges that don't match what you recorded paying. Either you were overcharged or you remembered wrong. Probably both. He studied her additions, her neat handwriting in the margins. You reorganized the categories. Your system didn't make sense. You had feed costs mixed with tool repairs, seasonal expenses scattered across months. I created a better structure. Without asking, she turned to face him. Do you want me to ask permission for everything, or do you want me to actually help manage this ranch? They stared at each other. Then Colt closed the ledger. Point taken. Just warn me next time before you overhaul something. I'll try to remember that. Dinner was quieter than the night before, both of them tired from the day's work. The stew was better than Colt's usual fare. Eliza had found herbs in the cupboard and had actually seasoned the food properly, but neither of them commented on it. Afterward, Colt went to check on the animals one final time while Eliza cleaned up. When he returned, she was sitting at the table with the ledger, making more notes by lamplight. You planning to work all night? He asked. Just finishing this. I want to have a full picture of the ranch's finances before the month ends. He pulled out a chair, sat down across from her. Why? Because you're operating on thin margins, and you don't even know it. You've got about 6 months of reserves if everything goes well. One bad winter or major repair, and you're in trouble. I know that. Do you? Because your spending patterns suggest otherwise. She turned the ledger so he could see. You're buying things at retail prices when you could negotiate bulk discounts. You're not tracking seasonal variations in income, and you've got no emergency fund. I manage. You survive. There's a difference. She met his eyes. If we're going to be partners in this, I need to know the full picture, all of it, what you owe, what's coming due, what risks you're carrying. Colt leaned back, studying her. You always this direct? When it matters. Are you always this evasive? Only about things that are embarrassing. He was quiet for a moment. I owe the bank $1,200, loan I took to buy the land and initial stock. Payments due twice a year, June and December. Next payments in 8 months. How much? $300. Can you make it? If I can get the herd through winter and sell calves in spring, yeah. If I lose too many to weather or predators, no. Eliza did the math in her head. What's your calf survival rate? Last 2 years, about 70%. That's low. I know that too. There was an edge in his voice now. I'm one man doing the work of 3. I lose calves because I can't be everywhere at once, can't watch for predators every night, can't prevent every difficult birth. I know the operation's not efficient. I know I'm barely holding on, but it's what I've got, and I'm doing the best I can with it. She saw it then. The pride and the defensiveness, the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting alone for too long. She softened her tone. I'm not criticizing, I'm assessing. There's a difference. Feels the same from this side. Then let me be clearer. You've built something remarkable here, Colt. You started with almost nothing, and you've created a functioning ranch. Most men would have failed already, but you're stretched too thin and you know it. That's why you sent for help. Your point? My point is that I can help, but only if you let me. That means sharing information, even when it's uncomfortable. It means accepting that I might see solutions you haven't thought of. And it means trusting that I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to work with you. Colt was quiet, his fingers drumming on the table. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The war messed me up, he said finally. Not physically, though I got my share of scars, but up here. He tapped his temple. I came back and I couldn't be around people the way I used to. Couldn't handle crowds, couldn't sleep in towns, needed space, quiet, room to breathe. That's why I came out here. I understand. Do you? Because what I'm saying is, I'm not good at partnerships. I'm not good at sharing or compromising or any of the things that make working with other people function. I know how to give orders and take orders, but I don't know how to collaborate. Then we'll both learn, Eliza said. Because I don't know how to run a ranch, and you don't know how to manage a household budget properly. We're both out of our depth. Might as well be out of our depth together. He almost smiled at that. You're stubborn. So are you. Yeah, I am. He stood, stretched. I'm going to bed. We've got early start tomorrow. Need to move the herd to the south pasture before the weather turns. Can I help? You ever moved cattle? No, but I can learn. You said that yourself. He considered her. All right. Tomorrow I'll teach you basic riding. If you don't fall off and break something, maybe you can help drive the herd. Fair warning, it's hard work and the cattle are stupid and stubborn. So I'll fit right in with them. That got a real smile, brief but genuine. Get some sleep. We start at dawn. After he'd gone to his room, Eliza sat alone with the ledger, making final notes. The numbers told a story of determination and barely controlled chaos, of a man trying to build something against long odds. She understood that better than he probably realized. She thought about Crawford and Dixon, about their questions and implications. Colt was right. Enduring was probably smarter than fighting, but part of her wanted to fight anyway, wanted to prove that she belonged here, that she was more than the scandal that had chased her west. Prove it to yourself, Colt had said. Not to me. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe she needed to stop worrying about what other people thought and focus on building something that mattered. The ranch could be that. This partnership could be that. If she didn't ruin it first. She closed the ledger, banked the fire, and retreated to her room. Sleep came easier tonight, her body exhausted from physical labor in a way that teaching never had been. Her last thought before darkness took her was of tomorrow, learning to ride, working with cattle, taking one more step toward becoming someone new. The morning came brutal and early. Eliza woke to Colt knocking on her door, his voice calling that they needed to move. She dressed in her oldest dress, braided her hair tight to keep it out of the way, and emerged to find Colt already preparing 2 horses. One was Cooper, his big roan. The other was a smaller mare, dark bay with a white blaze. "This is Sadie," Colt said. "She's steady, won't spook easy. Good horse for learning." Eliza approached cautiously. The mare was enormous up close, all muscle and height. Sadie turned to look at her with one large, dark eye, seemed to find her acceptable, and returned to her breakfast of hay. "First rule," Colt said, "the horse outweighs you by half a ton. Respect that. Second rule, horses are prey animals. They scare easy if you move wrong. Stay calm, move smooth, and she'll stay calm too." He walked her through the basics, how to approach, how to bridle, how to saddle. Eliza paid close attention, asked questions when things weren't clear. Colt was patient, more patient than she'd expected, demonstrating each step multiple times. "Now mount up." That was harder than it looked. The stirrup was high, the horse was tall, and Eliza's skirts were in the way. It took 3 tries before she managed to swing herself into the saddle, and even then she felt precarious and off balance. "Sit deep," Colt instructed. "Heels down, back straight. Hold the reins like this, firm but not tight. She'll feel what you're feeling, so if you're tense, she'll get tense." Easy for him to say. Eliza tried to breathe, tried to relax muscles that wanted to lock up. Beneath her, Sadie shifted weight, and Eliza grabbed for the saddle horn. "Easy," Colt said. "She's just adjusting. You're doing fine." "I feel like I'm about to fall off." "You won't. We'll start slow." He led Sadie in a circle around the yard, walking beside her while Eliza focused on staying seated and not panicking. After several circuits, he handed her the reins. "You're controlling her now. Gentle pressure to turn, squeeze with your legs to go forward, pull back easy to stop." Eliza tried it. Sadie responded, bless her, moving forward when asked and stopping when requested. It felt like a miracle. "Good," Colt said. "Now take her around the yard yourself, nice and slow." By the time he declared her ready to help with the cattle, Eliza's legs were aching and she'd fallen off once. A gentle tumble when Sadie had stopped faster than expected, and inertia had carried Eliza forward over the mare's neck. Colt had helped her up, checked that nothing was broken, and told her to get back on. "Everyone falls," he said. "What matters is getting back up." The actual cattle drive was controlled chaos. The herd, 42 cows and calves, all with their own ideas about where they wanted to go, needed to be moved from the north pasture to the south. Colt positioned Eliza at the rear with simple instructions. Keep them moving forward, don't let any break away. It was harder than it sounded. Cattle were large, stubborn, and had a gift for finding gaps to escape through. Eliza found herself riding back and forth, waving her arms and yelling to turn back wayward cows. Sadie, experienced at this work, did most of the actual herding while Eliza just tried to stay on and look useful. 2 hours later, sweating despite the cold and aching in places she hadn't known could ache, Eliza watched the last cow enter the south pasture. Colt secured the gate and rode over to where she sat slumped in the saddle. "You did good," he said. "I fell off twice. But you got back on, and you kept them moving." He nodded toward the pasture. "Herd's where it needs to be. That's what counts." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence. Eliza was too tired to talk, focused entirely on staying upright in the saddle. When they finally stopped at the barn, she nearly fell off dismounting, her legs uncertain beneath her. "You'll be sore tomorrow," Colt warned. "I'm sore now. Tomorrow will be worse. Hot bath tonight if you can manage it. Helps with the aches." Inside, Eliza discovered he was right about needing a bath. Her entire body screamed protest. She heated water, filled the small tub in the mudroom, and soaked until the water went cold. It helped, marginally. That night at dinner, she could barely lift her fork. Colt watched her struggle with something that might have been amusement. "Still want to help with ranch work?" he asked. "Yes?" "Even though you can barely move?" "Especially because I can barely move. Means I did something real today." "You did. You helped move 42 head of cattle 5 miles. That's real work." She looked up at him. "Thank you. For teaching me. For being patient. You earned it. You didn't quit, didn't complain. That's more than most people manage their first time." After dinner, they sat by the fire. Eliza because she was too tired to move, Colt because it was his habit. The flames cast flickering light across the room, and outside the wind howled its nightly song. "Tell me about the war," Eliza said. Colt's expression shuddered. "Why?" "Because you mentioned it, and then you stopped. Because I told you my story, and fair's fair. Because if we're going to be partners, I should know what shaped you." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and distant. "I enlisted in '61, thought it'd be quick, thought we'd be heroes. Spent 4 years learning I was wrong about everything, saw things no person should see. Did things I'm not proud of." He stared into the fire. "When I came home, everyone wanted to hear war stories. They wanted glory and valor and all that nonsense. I couldn't give them that. All I had was truth, and truth was ugly. So I stopped talking about it." "What happened with the woman you were supposed to marry?" "Sarah. Her name was Sarah." He took a breath. "We'd been engaged before I left. She waited 4 years, wrote letters, kept her promise. But when I came back, she saw I was different. I couldn't go to parties, couldn't handle the noise and the crowds. I'd wake up screaming some nights. I was angry all the time about nothing. She tried, I'll give her that. Tried for 6 months to make it work. But finally she said she'd fallen in love with who I was, not who I'd become. And she was right. That must have hurt." "Did. Still does sometimes, but she wasn't wrong to leave. I wasn't the man she'd agreed to marry anymore." He looked at Eliza. "That's why I came out here. Needed space to be who I am now without people expecting me to be who I was." Eliza understood that more than he knew. "I'm not expecting you to be anyone but who you are. You might regret that. I'm not easy to live with. Neither am I. I'm stubborn, opinionated, and I don't know when to keep my mouth shut. Ask the school board in Philadelphia." That got a small smile from him. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire crack and pop. "We're quite a pair," Colt said finally. "Both running from different versions of the same thing." "What's that?" "People who couldn't see us for who we really are." Eliza considered that. "Maybe we found the right place then. Out here, there's nobody to see us but each other." "And Crawford and Dixon and the whole town of Clearwater?" "Well, nobody important then." He laughed at that, a real laugh that seemed to surprise him. "Yeah, nobody important." They talked until the fire burned low and exhaustion finally drove them to their separate rooms. As Eliza lay in her bed, muscles aching and mind quiet, she felt something shift. The ranch was becoming familiar. The work was becoming routine, and Colt Mercer was becoming less of a stranger and more of something she didn't have a name for yet. Partner, certainly. But maybe eventually something more. The thought didn't scare her as much as it should have. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched vast and cold, but inside the ranch house, 2 people were building something that might withstand whatever storms were coming. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that was both grueling and strangely satisfying. Eliza's body adapted to the physical demands of ranch life. Her hands developed calluses, her muscles stopped screaming after every task, and she could mount Sadie without needing 3 attempts. The work was constant and varied, feeding animals, hauling water, repairing equipment, managing the household accounts that Colt had all but abandoned. By the end of the 3rd week, she'd reorganized the entire storage system in the barn, implemented a rotating schedule for pasture use that Colt grudgingly admitted made sense, and had saved them $40 by negotiating better prices with the mercantile in town. She'd also learned to shoot. Colt had insisted, saying a woman alone on the ranch needed to protect herself from predators, both animal and human. They worked well together, she and Colt. He was patient when teaching her new skills, and she was quick to learn. Their conversations grew easier, less guarded. They argued sometimes. Her stubbornness clashed with his, especially when it came to spending money or changing established routines. But the arguments were productive, ending in compromise more often than stalemate. What surprised Eliza most was how comfortable the silence between them had become. They could work side by side for hours without speaking, the quiet broken only by the sounds of labor and the ever-present wind. It wasn't the awkward silence of strangers or the hostile silence of people who'd run out of things to say. It was the silence of 2 people who didn't need words to fill every moment. Still, there were boundaries. Colt slept in his room, she in hers. They didn't discuss the future beyond immediate ranch concerns. The word marriage hung unspoken between them, a decision deferred by mutual unspoken agreement. Then November arrived with the first real storm. Eliza woke to darkness and the sound of wind that seemed determined to tear the roof off. Rain hammered the windows with a violence that made her sit upright in bed, heart racing. She'd experienced storms in Philadelphia, but nothing like this. This was primal, furious, the kind of weather that reminded humans how small they were. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Colt already up, staring out the window with an expression that made her stomach clench. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad. Temperature's dropping fast. This rain's going to turn to ice, maybe snow." He grabbed his coat. "I need to get the cattle closer to the barn, into the shelter of the South Ridge. They're too exposed where they are." "I'll help." "No, too dangerous. Wind's strong enough to knock you off your horse, and visibility's terrible. You can't move 42 head alone in this weather." "I've done it before." "That doesn't mean you should do it now." She was already reaching for her own coat. "You said we're partners. Partners don't let each other take stupid risks alone." He turned to face her, and for a moment she thought he'd argue. Then he nodded sharply. "Stay close to me. If I tell you to head back, you head back. Understood?" "Understood." They rode out into hell. The wind hit them like a physical force the moment they left the shelter of the barn. Rain slashed sideways, cold enough to sting exposed skin. Eliza pulled her hat down and hunched forward in the saddle, trusting Sadie to follow Cooper's lead. Finding the herd took longer than it should have. The cattle had scattered, seeking whatever shelter they could find in the lee of rocks and ridges. Colt shouted instructions that Eliza could barely hear over the wind, and they began the slow, miserable work of gathering the animals. A cow and calf had wedged themselves into a narrow draw. Eliza rode after them, using what Colt had taught her about cutting and driving. The cow didn't want to move, bellowing her displeasure, and the calf was terrified. Eliza had to dismount, approach on foot, and physically push the calf toward its mother while Sadie blocked the rear escape route. She was soaked through, shivering violently, her hands so cold she could barely feel the reins. But slowly, painfully, they got the herd moving toward the South Ridge. Then the rain turned to sleet. Ice pellets stung like thrown gravel. The ground became treacherous, slick with freezing water. One of the cows went down, legs splaying, and nearly took Colt's horse with her. He managed to keep Cooper upright, but it was close. "We're not going to make it," Eliza shouted. "We have to," Colt shouted back. "They'll die out here." But nature didn't care about determination. The sleet became snow, thick and blinding. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Eliza could barely see Colt, could barely see the cattle, could barely see her own hands on the reins. "Back to the house!" Colt's voice cut through the storm. "Now!" They abandoned the effort, turning the horses toward home. Even that was dangerous. The snow was so heavy that landmarks disappeared, and Eliza had a moment of pure terror when she realized she couldn't see the ranch buildings at all. But Cooper knew the way home, and Sadie followed. When the barn finally loomed out of the white chaos, Eliza nearly cried with relief. They got the horses inside and unsaddled. Colt's hands were shaking as badly as hers, his face pale beneath the frost that clung to his beard. "The cattle," Eliza said through chattering teeth, "will have to fend for themselves. We did what we could." He looked at her, really looked, and his expression shifted to concern. "You're freezing. Get inside, get warm. I'll finish here." "I can help." "Inside, that's not a suggestion." She was too cold to argue. She stumbled to the house, peeled off her soaked clothes in the mudroom, and wrapped herself in blankets. Her whole body was shaking, teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. Colt came in 15 minutes later, looking worse than she felt. He stripped off his own wet clothes, added more wood to the fire, and huddled close to the flames. "That was stupid," he said after a while. "I shouldn't have taken you out in that." "I chose to come. I should have ordered you to stay." "I don't take orders well. You should know that by now." He almost smiled. "Yeah, I should." They sat in silence, warming slowly. The storm raged outside, shaking the windows, testing the walls. Inside, the fire pushed back the cold one small space at a time. "We might lose some of them," Colt said quietly. "The cattle. The young ones especially. They don't have the body mass to survive this kind of cold if they can't find shelter. We did everything we could. Doesn't feel like enough." Eliza understood that. She'd felt the same way in Philadelphia when her reputation crumbled, the helpless frustration of watching something fall apart despite every effort to save it. "Tell me about Sarah," she said. Colt's head came up. "What?" "You said her name once, but you didn't tell me about her, about what happened." "Why do you want to know?" "Because we're sitting in a storm that might kill half your herd, and distraction seems better than dwelling on things we can't control." He considered that, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He stared into the fire. "I met her when I was 19. She was the daughter of the town doctor, smart and pretty and completely out of my league. Took me 6 months to work up the courage to talk to her." "What did you say?" "Asked if she'd like to go walking by the river. Stammered the whole thing, probably turned red as a beet. She said yes, anyway." His expression softened with memory. "We courted for 2 years, got engaged right before I enlisted. She promised to wait, and I believed her." "What was she like?" "Kind, patient. She loved music, could play piano like nothing I'd ever heard. She wanted a family, a normal life, stability. All the things I wanted too back then." "What changed?" "The war changed me. I told you that part." He was quiet for a moment. "When I came back, she tried. Really tried. But I couldn't be who I'd been. Couldn't go to church socials without feeling like the walls were closing in. Couldn't sleep through the night without waking up somewhere else in my head. Couldn't be around loud noises or crowds or any of the normal things that made up her life. So she left. So I left. Told her she deserved better than what I'd become, and I meant it. She cried, said she wanted to make it work. But we both knew it was over." He looked at Eliza. "I don't blame her. I was a mess. Still am in some ways. You're not a mess. You haven't seen me on the bad nights." "I've heard you," she said quietly. "The nights when you wake up. When you pace the house at 2 a.m, thinking I'm asleep." He went still. "You hear that? These walls are thin. I hear a lot of things. I didn't want you to know about that." "Why? Because you think it makes you weak?" She shifted to face him. "Colt, we've all got scars. Some are just louder than others. That doesn't make you less capable or less worthy." Sarah thought it did. Then Sarah was wrong. The certainty in her voice surprised them both. "You built this ranch alone. You survived a war that broke most men. You took a chance on a stranger with a ruined reputation when you could have played it safe. That's not weakness. That's the opposite." He studied her face in the firelight, and something shifted in his expression, the walls coming down, just a fraction. "You always this sure of yourself?" "Almost never, but I'm sure about this." The wind howled, driving snow against the windows with renewed fury. The temperature was dropping further. Eliza could feel it even through the fire's warmth. This was going to be a long, brutal night. "Tell me about him," Colt said. "The man who ruined you." Eliza's throat tightened. She told him the basic facts, but not the details, not the parts that still felt like open wounds. You want to hear that? You heard mine. Fair's fair, like you said. She took a breath. His name was Richard Thornton. Wealthy family, old money, married to a woman who spent most of her time away. He sat on the school board where I taught, started noticing me about 6 months before everything fell apart. What'd he do? At first, nothing I could point to as wrong. Compliments, small talk after meetings, invitations to cultural events that seemed professional. I was flattered initially. He was educated, sophisticated, seemed interested in my opinions. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. Then the invitations became more personal. Dinners alone, suggestions of evening walks, comments about how his wife didn't understand him. I started refusing politely, tried to maintain professional distance. He didn't take the hint. He took it as a challenge, started showing up at the school, waiting after classes, sending notes to my boarding house. I finally told him outright that I wasn't interested, that his behavior was inappropriate. That's when his expression changed. He smiled, this cold, cruel smile, and said I was making a serious mistake. Colt's hands clenched. What happened next? 2 weeks later, rumors started. A student claimed I'd been inappropriate with him. Another said I'd shown favoritism in exchange for personal favors. Parents complained to the board. Thornton sat there during the investigation, all concern and disappointment, asking the right questions to make me look guilty. Her voice hardened. The evidence was all lies, but it didn't matter. I had no allies, no money, no connections. The board dismissed me to avoid scandal. You try to fight it? For a while. Went to other schools, but the rumors followed. Thornton had friends everywhere, and his version of events spread faster than truth ever could. Finally, I ran out of options and money. That's when I saw your advertisement. They sat with that for a moment, the fire crackling between them. You want to know the worst part? Eliza said. It wasn't the accusations or losing my job. It was how quickly everyone believed it. People I'd worked with for years, students I'd helped, other teachers who'd called me friend, they all believed I was capable of what he said. No one fought for me. No one questioned his story. I was disposable, and that's what hurt most. I'm sorry that happened to you. Don't be sorry. Be different. She met his eyes. You already are, but keep being it. Keep being someone who questions the stories, who looks for truth instead of accepting easy lies. That work both ways? What do you mean? Means I've got things I'm not proud of. Things from the war, things after. If you're going to see me clearly, you need to know about those too. The storm intensified outside, and with it, the darkness in Colt's expression deepened. Eliza waited, letting him find the words in his own time. I killed people in the war, he said finally. I know that's what soldiers do, but it wasn't clean or honorable like they tell you. It was messy and terrible, and some of them weren't soldiers. They were just people in the wrong place at the wrong time. I did things because I was ordered to, and I did things because I was angry and scared, and I can't take any of it back. You were in a war. That doesn't excuse it. After I came home, I tried to be normal, tried to fit back into the life I'd left. But I couldn't. I'd get angry over nothing, break things, say horrible things to people who were just trying to help. Sarah wasn't the only one who left. I drove away almost everyone who cared about me. By the time I came out here, I'd burned every bridge I had. But you came out here and started over. I ran away. Same as you did. We both ran, Eliza corrected, but running towards something new isn't the same as running away from something old. We're building here, Colt. That counts for something. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and disbelief, like he wanted to accept her words but didn't quite trust them. The fire burned lower and Eliza added more wood. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. The temperature inside the house was dropping despite the fire, cold seeping through every crack and gap. We should probably sleep in here tonight, Colt said. Keep the fire going, stay warm, bedrooms are going to be freezing. He was right. Eliza could already feel the cold radiating from the walls. She retrieved blankets from her room while Colt added more wood to the fire and arranged cushions from the chairs into makeshift bedding. They settled on opposite sides of the fireplace, wrapped in layers of wool and watching the flames dance. Outside, the wind screamed like something alive and furious. Colt? Yeah? I'm glad I'm here. Even with the storm, even with the cattle we might lose, I'm glad I came. He was quiet for a long moment. I'm glad you came too. They fell silent after that, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was full of things unsaid, of understanding slowly built between two people who'd learned not to trust easily. The fire crackled, and the wind howled, and somewhere out in the darkness, the cattle fought to survive the night. Eliza dozed off eventually, exhaustion winning out over discomfort. When she woke, it was to find the fire burned down to embers and the room bitterly cold. She sat up, disoriented, and saw Colt standing at the window. "What is it?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Storm's passing, snow's letting up." She joined him at the window. Outside, the world had transformed. Everything was white: the yard, the barn, the pastures, all of it buried under snow that gleamed in the pre-dawn light. The wind had died down to occasional gusts, and snowflakes fell lazily now instead of in violent sheets. How much snow? 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet in the drifts. His expression was grim. "I need to go check on the herd." "I'm coming with you." He didn't argue this time, just nodded. They dressed in layers, wrapped themselves against the cold, and ventured out into the transformed landscape. The snow was deep enough that walking was difficult, each step requiring effort. They made their way to the south ridge where they'd tried to drive the herd the night before. What they found was both better and worse than Eliza had feared. Most of the cattle had survived, huddled together in the lee of the ridge where natural rock formations provided some shelter. They looked miserable, coated in ice and snow, bellowing complaints, but they were alive. But not all of them. They found 3 calves dead, frozen where they'd fallen. 1 cow had gone down as well, probably injured in the chaos and unable to rise before the cold claimed her. Colt stood looking at the dead animals, his expression carved from stone. Eliza could see the weight of it settling on his shoulders, the loss, the failure, the harsh arithmetic of ranch life where death was just another cost of doing business. 4, he said quietly. "Could have been worse. Could have been better if I hadn't slowed you down yesterday." "Don't." His voice was sharp. "Don't make this about blame. Weather doesn't care about what we could have or should have done. It just is." He was right, but the losses still hurt. Eliza thought about the calf she'd pushed out of that draw, wondered if it had survived, hoped it had. They spent the rest of the day digging out, clearing paths to the barn, breaking ice from water troughs, making sure the surviving cattle had access to hay. It was brutal work, made worse by the cold that seemed to seep through every layer of clothing. By the time they finished, it was nearly dark again. They stumbled back to the house, too exhausted to do more than heat some soup and eat it in silence. "We lost about 10% of the herd," Colt said eventually. "That's going to hurt come spring when I need to sell. Can we recover? If we don't lose any more, if the rest of the winter's mild, if everything goes right?" He rubbed his face. "That's a lot of ifs. What if we didn't wait until spring?" He looked up. "What? You've got neighbors, Crawford, Dixon, others. What if you sold some of the breeding stock now? Got cash in hand before winter gets worse? Prices are low in winter. Better than losing more to weather and getting nothing." He considered that. "I'd take a loss." "You're going to take a loss anyway, if we have another storm like this one. At least this way you control it." Colt was quiet, thinking it through. Eliza could see the resistance in him, the rancher's instinct to hold stock, to wait for better prices, to gamble on spring, but she could also see him doing the math, weighing risks against certainties. "I'll think about it," he said finally. 3 days later, he sold 8 head to Crawford at a discount. It hurt to watch them go, but the cash filled a gap in the ranch's finances that had been keeping Eliza awake at night. "You were right," Colt admitted after Crawford left. "About selling now. Doesn't make it feel any better." "No, but it was still the right call." Winter settled in after that, harsh and unforgiving. More storms came, though none as violent as that first one. They lost 2 more calves and another cow, but they kept the rest alive through constant vigilance and grueling work. The isolation deepened. Snow made the trip to town impossible for weeks at a stretch. It was just the 2 of them, day after day, working and surviving and slowly learning each other in ways that went beyond words. Eliza discovered that Colt couldn't carry a tune but hummed while he worked anyway. That he was surprisingly good at mending, his hands gentle and precise with needle and thread. That he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was tired, catching her off guard with observations that made her laugh. Colt discovered that Eliza talked to the chickens like they were students who needed encouragement. that she reorganized things without asking because the chaos bothered her, that she was stubborn as hell but would admit when she was wrong, though it clearly cost her. They argued sometimes about money, about priorities, about the best way to manage the ranch. But the arguments felt different now, less like battles and more like negotiations between equals. One night in late December, they sat by the fire after dinner, both too tired to move. The wind was up again, but nothing like the storm. Just Wyoming reminding them it was still in charge. "I've been thinking," Colt said. "Dangerous habit." He smiled slightly. "About the ranch, about partnership, about making this official." Eliza's heart skipped. "Official how? The land's in my name. If something happens to me, you'd have nothing. No legal claim, no protection. That's not fair, and it's not smart." "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we go to town when the weather breaks, get the land deed amended, put half of it in your name, make you a legal partner in this enterprise." She stared at him. "Colt, that's a lot to give." "It's not giving, it's recognizing reality. You've worked as hard as I have to keep this place running. You've earned a stake in it. People will talk. Unmarried woman owning half a ranch with a man. Let them talk. We know the truth, and that's what matters." Eliza felt something shift in her chest, something warm and terrifying all at once. This wasn't a declaration of love or a romantic gesture. This was something better. It was trust, concrete and legally binding. It was Colt saying she belonged here, that her work mattered, that she was essential. "All right," she said. "When the weather breaks, we'll make it official." He nodded, satisfied. Then, after a pause, "There's something else." "What?" "Marriage. We should probably discuss that too." Her breath caught. "Should we?" "We've been dancing around it since you arrived. Seems like we should either do it or decide not to and move on." "Very romantic," she said dryly. "I'm not a romantic man, Eliza. You know that by now." He turned to face her fully. "But I am a practical one. Marriage would give you legal protection, social standing. It would make the partnership cleaner in the eyes of the law. And it would stop people in town from speculating about what we're doing out here. Those are practical reasons." "Yeah. What about impractical ones?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer. "I trust you. I like working with you. I sleep better knowing you're in the next room, knowing I'm not alone out here anymore. And I think maybe we could build something good together. Not just the ranch. Something more." "You think or you know?" "I think. I'm not ready to know yet. Are you?" She considered the question honestly. Did she love Colt? She didn't know. What she felt was complicated. Respect, definitely. Trust, growing stronger every day. Affection, surprising and real. Physical attraction, though they'd both been careful not to acknowledge it. But love? That word still felt too big, too risky. "I think too," she said finally. "I think you're a good man who's been through terrible things and came out still trying to be decent. I think we work well together. I think I feel safer here than I've felt anywhere else. And I think marriage might make sense, even if we're not sure about all the feelings yet." "That's a yes?" "That's a maybe leaning toward yes. Ask me again when we go to town to change the deed." "Fair enough." They sat with that, the decision half made and hanging in the air between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Inside, the fire burned steady and warm, holding back the cold. "Colt?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For trusting me with the land. For seeing me as a partner, not just help you hired." "You earned it, Eliza, every bit of it." She smiled at him, and he smiled back. And in that moment, something shifted between them, subtle but significant. They weren't just two people thrown together by circumstance anymore. They were choosing this, choosing each other, building something deliberate out of the wreckage of their pasts. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the windows, Wyoming waited to test them again. But inside the ranch house, two damaged people sat together, not quite whole, but getting closer, finding strength in partnership and hope in the possibility of something more. The weather broke in mid-January, giving them a window to make the trip to town. They loaded the wagon with supplies to sell, eggs, butter. Eliza had churned 2 dressed chickens, and set out early on a morning cold enough to freeze breath in the air. Clearwater looked smaller in the winter light, buildings huddled against the cold like the cattle on the ridge. The main street was mostly empty, just a few hardy souls moving between the mercantile and the saloon. Colt guided the wagon to a stop outside the land office, a small building squeezed between the bank and a lawyer's office. "You ready?" he asked. Eliza nodded, though her stomach was tight with nerves. This was real, putting her name on a legal document, claiming ownership of something substantial. It felt enormous. Inside, the land office was warm from a pot-bellied stove, and the clerk was a thin man named Henderson who looked perpetually suspicious of everyone. "Mercer," Henderson said by way of greeting. "What brings you in?" "Need to amend a deed, adding a partner." Henderson's eyes shifted to Eliza, and she saw the calculation happening. Single woman, Colt's mail-order bride, now getting her name on his property. His expression soured. "That right? What kind of partner are we talking about?" "The kind that owns half the land," Colt said flatly. "You got a problem with that?" "No problem, just unusual, that's all. Most men don't give away half their holdings to—" "To what?" Colt's voice had gone cold. Henderson backed down slightly. "To anyone. Man works hard for land, usually keeps it. Miss Whitmore's worked just as hard. She's earned her stake. Now are you going to process this, or do I need to take it to the county seat?" Henderson pursed his lips, but pulled out the necessary forms. "Need both your signatures, and there's a fee." They went through the paperwork methodically, Henderson asking questions and recording answers in his precise handwriting. When it came time to sign, Eliza's hand trembled slightly as she wrote her name next to Colt's. Eliza Ann Whitmore, co-owner of 320 acres in Wyoming Territory. Henderson applied his seal, made copies, and handed them each a document. "There, it's official. Congratulations, Miss Whitmore, you're a landowner." The word felt strange and wonderful. Landowner. Her. A woman who 6 months ago had owned nothing but a carpet bag and a ruined reputation. "Thank you," she said. Outside, Colt folded his copy carefully and tucked it inside his coat. "How's it feel?" "Terrifying, real, important." She looked at him. "Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you. We're partners now, legal and binding." He paused. "Speaking of legal and binding, there's something else we should discuss while we're in town. The marriage question." "Yeah, you had time to think about it?" She had. She'd thought about little else through the long winter nights, weighing practicality against emotion, safety against risk. "I have. And I think we should do it. Not because we have to, but because it makes sense. We work well together, we trust each other, and I think—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "I think we could build something good, like you said." He studied her face. "You sure? Because once we do this, it's not easy to undo." "I'm sure. Are you?" "Yeah, I am." He took a breath. "But I want to be clear about something first. I'm not promising perfect. I'm not promising I won't have bad nights or bad days. I'm not promising this will be easy. I don't want perfect, Colt. I want honest. I want someone who sees me for who I am, not who they think I should be. You've given me that since the day I arrived. That's more than most people get in a lifetime." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "All right then. Let's do this." They found Judge Morrison in his office above the mercantile, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. He listened to their request, asked if they were both willing and of sound mind, and then pulled out a worn book. "You got witnesses?" Colt looked around the small office. "Not exactly." Morrison sighed. "Hold on." He stepped to the door and shouted down the stairs. "Martha, need you up here." A woman appeared a minute later, wiping flour from her hands. Morrison's wife, apparently. She took one look at Eliza and Colt and smiled. "Well now, about time someone brought some happiness into this office. Tom's been married to his law book so long he forgot what real weddings look like." "It's just a legal arrangement," Colt said. Martha laughed. "Sure it is, son. That's what they all say." She positioned herself next to the judge. "I'm ready when you are." Morrison cleared his throat and began the ceremony. It was brief and practical. No flowery language or romantic promises. "Do you take this woman? Do you take this man?" "I do. I do. By the authority vested in me. Man and wife." When it came time to seal it with a kiss, Colt looked at Eliza with something like uncertainty. She made the decision for both of them, leaning up to press her lips briefly to his. It was chaste, quick, nothing like what people probably imagined a wedding kiss should be. But when they pulled apart, something had changed. Some line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. "Congratulations," Morrison said, handing them a marriage certificate. "May you find what you're looking for in each other." Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, painting the snow-covered street in shades of gold. They stood on the boardwalk, newly married, legally bound, and Eliza felt the weight and wonder of it settling over her. "So," Colt said, "Mrs. Mercer." She tested the name in her mind. Eliza Mercer. It sounded foreign and familiar all at once. "Gonna take some getting used to. For both of us." He glanced down the street. "We should probably tell people. Stop the gossip before it starts. Or we could just go home and let them figure it out." He smiled at that. "I like how you think." They made one stop at the mercantile to sell their goods and buy supplies. The mercantile owner, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who seemed to know everything that happened in Clearwater, noticed the marriage certificate when Colt pulled out money to pay. "Well," she said, eyes lighting up, "congratulations are in order, I see." "Thank you," Eliza said. "Married by Judge Morrison today?" "Just now, actually." Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted to something calculating. "Quick wedding, not much planning." "Didn't need planning," Colt said. "Just needed to be done." The implication in Mrs. Patterson's look was clear. Quick marriages usually meant one thing. Eliza felt heat rise in her face, anger mixing with embarrassment. "We've been working the ranch together for months," she said, keeping her voice level. "Seemed practical to make the partnership legal." "Of course," Mrs. Patterson said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "Well, welcome to Clearwater, Mrs. Mercer. I'm sure you'll fit right in." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Eliza could feel the anger simmering in her chest, the familiar frustration of being judged, being assumed to be something she wasn't. "Don't let her get to you," Colt said after a while. "Easy for you to say. She didn't look at you like you're a scheming woman who trapped a man. She looked at me like I'm a fool who got trapped. Trust me, the judgment goes both ways." He glanced at her. People like Patterson need something to gossip about. We gave it to them. They'll chew on it for a while, then move on to something else." "You really don't care what they think?" "I care what you think. I care what I think. The rest is just noise." He paused. "But I get that it bothers you. Your reputation mattered in your old life. Hard to shake that." He was right. In Philadelphia, reputation had been everything. It determined who would hire you, who would socialize with you, whether you'd succeed or fail. Out here, Colt insisted it mattered less, but the old habits died hard. "I'll try," she said, "to care less about what they think." That's all anyone can do. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered land in shades of pink and orange. Colt helped her down from the wagon, and they stood for a moment looking at the house, the barn, the pastures beyond. "It's ours now," he said. "Legally, both of us." "Feels different, doesn't it? Now that it's official." "Yeah, it does." They went inside, and the routine of evening chores took over, feeding animals, starting dinner, banking the fire for the night. But underneath the familiar rhythms, something had shifted. They were married now, partners in every legal sense. The question of what that meant in practical terms hung unspoken between them. After dinner, they sat by the fire, as had become their habit. Colt seemed restless, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. "What is it?" Eliza asked. "Just thinking." "About?" "About the fact that we're married now, and I don't know what you expect that to mean." She set down her mending. "What do you want it to mean?" "Honestly, I don't know. The practical part's settled. You've got legal protection, we're partners in the ranch. But the rest of it," he trailed off. "The rest of it we figure out as we go," Eliza said. "We don't have to rush anything. We've got time." "You sure about that? Because most wives would have expectations." "I'm not most wives, and you're not most husbands. We do this our way, at our pace." She paused. "Unless you want something different?" He met her eyes. "I want you to feel safe here. I want you to know that nothing changes unless you want it to. You've still got your room, your space. I'm not expecting anything just because we signed papers." Relief and something else, disappointment maybe, flickered through her. All right, thank you. But later, lying in her bed and staring at the ceiling, Eliza wondered if she'd been too quick to accept his reassurance. Part of her wanted things to change, wanted to explore what this marriage could become beyond a legal arrangement. But she was afraid too, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of wanting something and being rejected, afraid of ruining the good thing they'd built by wanting more. In his own room, Colt lay awake with similar thoughts. He'd told Eliza nothing had to change, and he'd meant it. But he'd also felt something when they'd kissed at the ceremony, brief as it was. Something that made him want more, made him wonder what it would be like to have a real marriage instead of just a practical one. But he was damaged goods, and he knew it. The war had broken something in him that hadn't healed, might never heal. What right did he have to ask Eliza for more when he couldn't promise to be whole? Winter dragged on. February brought more snow and brutal cold. They worked together, ate together, sat by the fire together, but something had grown tense between them since the wedding. They were careful with each other now, polite in a way they hadn't been before, like the legal binding had somehow made them strangers again. It was Eliza who finally broke the stalemate. They were in the barn one afternoon, mucking out stalls, a job they both hated, but that needed doing. Colt was working in silence, methodical as always, when Eliza stopped and leaned on her shovel. "This is stupid," she said. He looked up. "What is?" "This. Us. We're acting like strangers when we were friends before we got married. I don't like it." "I don't either. So let's stop. Let's go back to being honest with each other instead of this careful politeness." He set down his shovel, wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "All right, honestly? I don't know how to be married. I don't know what you want from me, and I'm afraid of doing the wrong thing." "Honestly? I don't know either. And I'm afraid too. I'm afraid of wanting more than you can give, afraid of pushing too hard, afraid of losing what we've built by wanting it to be something different." They stared at each other across the stall, both holding shovels full of manure, having possibly the most important conversation of their marriage. "What do you want?" Colt asked. "If you could have anything, what would it be?" Eliza took a breath. "I want a real marriage. Not just a partnership, not just a legal arrangement. I want someone I can trust completely, someone who sees me and knows me and chooses me anyway. I want to build a life together, not just run a ranch together. And you think we could have that?" "I think we could try, if you want to." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to mess this up sometimes. I'm going to have bad nights where I wake up shouting, bad days where I can't be around people. I'm going to be difficult and stubborn and maybe not the husband you deserve. And I'm going to be opinionated and pushy and occasionally impossible. I'm going to reorganize things without asking and argue with you about money and probably drive you crazy. We're both damaged, Colt, but maybe we're damaged in ways that fit together." Something in his expression softened. He set down his shovel, crossed the stall to where she stood. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then he reached out, cupped her face in his work-roughened hand. "I want to try," he said. "I want to build something real with you. I'm just scared of failing." "We might fail, but at least we'd fail together." She leaned into his touch. "And maybe we won't fail. Maybe we'll build something better than either of us could imagine." He kissed her then, different from the brief press of lips at their wedding. This was real, intentional, a beginning instead of a formality. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "So," Eliza said, "we're doing this." "Yeah, we are." They finished the barn work in better spirits, talking like they used to, the tension broken. That night, after dinner, Colt hesitated at the door to his bedroom. "You could stay out here," Eliza said, "by the fire. We could talk more." "I'd like that." They sat up late, talking about everything and nothing, childhood memories, dreams for the ranch, fears they'd never voiced. When Eliza finally headed to bed, Colt caught her hand. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on this. On us. Thank you for being willing to try." The next weeks brought a shift in their relationship, subtle but significant. They were more comfortable touching now, a hand on the shoulder while passing, fingers brushing when handing over tools, sitting closer together by the fire. The distance they'd maintained was closing, slowly, carefully, both of them testing the waters of something deeper. In early March, a letter arrived. The stage driver brought it out personally, making a special trip because it was marked urgent. Eliza's name was on the envelope, and the return address made her blood run cold. Philadelphia. From the law offices of Whitmore and Sons, her father's firm, or what had been her father's firm before he died. With shaking hands, she opened it while Colt watched, concern etched on his face. The letter was brief and impersonal, written by a lawyer she'd never met. It informed her that Richard Thornton had died of a heart attack 2 months prior. In the aftermath, several women had come forward with accusations similar to Eliza's. An investigation had been launched. The school board had issued a formal apology and acknowledgement that the charges against her had been false. Her name was cleared. Eliza read it twice, then a third time, unable to process what it meant. The thing she'd fled, the scandal that had chased her across the country, the lies that had destroyed her life, all of it acknowledged as false, officially, publicly. Eliza? Colt's voice was gentle. What is it? She handed him the letter. He read it quickly, his expression darkening. The man who lied about you is dead. Yes. And they're saying you were right all along. Yes. He set the letter down. How do you feel? That was the question, wasn't it? How did she feel? She searched for anger, for vindication, for some surge of emotion that matched the enormity of what she'd just learned. But all she felt was empty. I don't know, she said honestly. I thought this would matter more. I thought if I ever got proof that I was telling the truth, it would change everything. But it doesn't change anything. Not really. It clears your name. In Philadelphia. In a life I don't have anymore. She looked around the ranch house, at the life she'd built here. This is real. That's just paper. You could go back. With your name cleared, you could teach again. Have the life you wanted. The suggestion made something twist in her chest. Is that what you want? For me to leave? No, but I want you to have the choice. You came here because you were running out of options. Now you have options again. You should know that. She stood, paced to the window, looked out at the Wyoming landscape that had become home. I don't want to go back. That life, those people, they didn't fight for me when it mattered. They believed the worst and turned their backs. Why would I want to return to that? Because it's what you know. Because teaching was what you loved. Was. Past tense. She turned to face him. I love this ranch. I love the work we're doing. I love... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Love what? His voice was quiet, careful. This, us, what we're building together. She took a breath. I love you, Colt. And I don't want to go back to Philadelphia because everything I want is right here. The silence that followed felt enormous. Colt stood frozen, and Eliza immediately regretted the words. She'd said too much, pushed too far, broken the careful balance they'd been building. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed her. Really kissed her. The kind of kiss that said everything words couldn't. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. I love you too, he said. I've been trying not to, trying to keep distance, trying to protect both of us. But I can't anymore. I love you, Eliza Mercer, and I want you to stay. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you choose to be here, with me. She kissed him again, joy and relief flooding through her. I choose this. I choose you. I choose us. That night, they didn't sleep in separate rooms. They came together with a mix of tenderness and urgency, 2 people finally allowing themselves to want what they'd been denying. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments, uncertainties, the strange vulnerability of being fully known by another person. But it was real and honest and theirs. Afterward, lying tangled together in Colt's bed, Eliza felt a peace she'd never experienced before. The past didn't matter anymore. Philadelphia, Richard Thornton, the lies and the scandal, all of it was just noise, powerless to touch what she'd built here. Are you all right? Colt asked, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. Better than all right. I'm home. He tightened his arms around her. Yeah, you are? Spring came slowly to Wyoming, winter reluctant to release its grip. But eventually, the snow melted, revealing grass beneath. The cattle survived in better numbers than expected, and calves were born healthy and strong. The ranch began to thrive under their joint management. Colt's knowledge and Eliza's organization creating something more effective than either could have achieved alone. In April, a new family moved to Clearwater. They had 3 school-aged children, and within a week other families were talking about the need for a proper school. The town council approached Colt and Eliza one afternoon when they were in for supplies. "We need a teacher," Councilman Harris said. "Someone educated, someone capable. We heard Mrs. Mercer taught back east." Eliza felt Colt's eyes on her, waiting to see how she'd respond. "I did teach," she said carefully, "in Philadelphia. Would you consider teaching here? We can't pay much, but we could provide a building, supplies. The children need proper education." She looked at Colt. He gave a slight nod, leaving the choice to her. "I'd need to discuss it with my husband, and I'd have conditions." "Such as?" "Such as I'd teach on my terms with my curriculum. I'd expect parents to respect my authority in the classroom, and I'd need flexibility to manage ranch duties as well." Harris glanced at the other council members. "That seems reasonable. Think about it. Discuss it. Let us know." On the ride home, Colt was quiet. Finally, Eliza spoke. "You don't want me to do it." "Didn't say that." "You're thinking it." He sighed. "I'm thinking that teaching was part of your old life, the life that hurt you. I'm worried about you going back to something that might bring all that pain back. It's not going back, it's going forward." She touched his arm. "I love teaching, Colt. I was good at it. Having it taken away from me hurt as much as the lies did. This would be a chance to reclaim that part of myself, but on my terms, in a place where I'm known and trusted." "You sure you can manage both, the teaching and the ranch? We managed to survive winter with just the 2 of us. I think we can figure this out." She smiled. "Besides, you're always saying we need to be part of the community. Stop hiding out here." "I never said that." "You were thinking it." He laughed. "All right. If you want to teach, teach. I'll support whatever you decide." 2 weeks later, Eliza stood in front of 8 students in a building that had been hastily converted from a storage shed. It wasn't much. Rough benches, a chalkboard donated by the mercantile, books she'd ordered from a catalog using ranch money. But it was hers. Teaching in Clearwater was different from Philadelphia in every way that mattered. The students were eager rather than entitled, grateful for education rather than taking it for granted. The parents were supportive, trusting her judgment instead of questioning every decision. And at the end of each day, she rode home to a ranch she owned, to a husband she loved, to a life she'd chosen. The town gossip about her past faded as people saw who she actually was. Mrs. Patterson even came around, grudgingly admitting that Eliza was a fine teacher, and Colt was lucky to have her. On a warm evening in late May, Colt and Eliza sat on the porch they'd built together, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch was thriving, the school was succeeding, and the future stretched out before them full of possibility. "You ever regret it?" Colt asked. "Answering that advertisement, coming out here?" "Not once. Do you regret sending it?" "Best decision I ever made." He took her hand, laced their fingers together. "We built something good here, didn't we?" "We did, and we're not done yet." He looked at her, caught something in her tone. "What do you mean?" She'd been waiting for the right moment to tell him, and this felt right, sitting together in the quiet evening, at peace with each other and the world. "I mean, we're going to need to build a bigger house, eventually." It took him a moment to understand. When he did, his eyes widened. "I am. About 3 months along, I think, maybe 4. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then a smile broke across his face, genuine and unguarded in a way she rarely saw. "A baby. A baby. You all right with that?" He pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "More than all right. He laughed, the sound full of wonder. "I'm going to be a father." "A good one," she said with certainty. "You'll be a good father." They sat together as darkness fell, making plans and dreaming dreams. 2 people who'd arrived at this place broken and alone, who'd built something strong enough to hold not just themselves, but a future they were creating together. The ranch stretched around them, solid and real. The town of Clearwater settled in for the night, and somewhere in the darkness, Wyoming kept watch over 2 people who'd found in each other exactly what they'd been searching for all along. Not perfection, not an easy life, just truth, partnership, and the kind of love that was built rather than found, strong enough to weather any storm that came their way. Summer brought heat that shimmered off the prairie in waves, turning the distant mountains into wavering mirages. Eliza's pregnancy became visible, her body changing in ways both wonderful and uncomfortable. She kept teaching through June, though the children's restlessness and the heat made lessons more challenging. By July, when the school year ended, she was grateful for the break. The ranch demanded constant attention during the growing season. Hay needed cutting and storing, fences required repair after winter damage, and the cattle needed rotating through pastures to prevent overgrazing. Colt hired 2 hands for the summer, young men from town looking for work, which helped with the heaviest labor, but also men adjusting to having others around. Eliza found herself in the unfamiliar role of managing a household with workers to feed. She cooked large meals 3 times a day, packed lunches for the men working distant fence lines, and kept the bunkhouse stocked with clean linens. It was exhausting work on top of her regular duties, and by evening she was often too tired to do more than collapse into bed. One afternoon in late July, she was kneading bread dough when dizziness swept over her. She gripped the table edge, waiting for it to pass, but instead the room tilted sharply. The next thing she knew, she was on the floor with Colt kneeling beside her, his face pale with fear. "Don't move," he said. "Just breathe." "I'm fine. Just got dizzy." "You passed out." "That's not fine." He helped her to a chair. "How long have you been feeling like this?" "It's just the heat. And I've been doing too much." "Damn right you've been doing too much." His voice was sharp with worry. "You're teaching and cooking for 4 people and doing all your regular work. Something's got to give, Eliza. We need the help for the ranch. You can't manage alone. I managed before you got here. I can manage again." He crouched in front of her chair, taking her hands. "The ranch matters, but not more than you. Not more than the baby. If we have to let the hands go, we let them go. That's not practical. I don't care about practical right now. I care that my wife just collapsed in the kitchen." She saw the fear beneath his anger, understood that this went deeper than today's incident. This was about his war experiences, about watching people he cared about get hurt, about his bone-deep terror of losing someone else. "I'll slow down," she promised. "I'll let the hands cook for themselves a few days a week. I'll rest more. But we're not firing them, Colt. We need them, and they need the work." He wasn't happy about it, but he nodded. "You rest more, or I'm sending you to bed myself." "You could join me there, make it worth my while." That surprised a laugh out of him, breaking the tension. "You're impossible. You married me anyway." "Yeah, I did." She kept her promise, delegating more work to the hired hands and spending afternoons resting instead of working. It chafed at her independent nature, but she couldn't deny that she felt better. The dizziness faded, her energy returned, and the baby moved more actively, strong kicks that made Colt's face light up every time he felt them. In August, Martha Morrison, the judge's wife who'd witnessed their wedding, came calling with several other women from town. Eliza was hanging laundry when they arrived in a wagon loaded with packages. "Heard you were expecting," Martha said by way of greeting. "Thought you might need some things." The packages contained baby clothes, blankets, diapers, and a beautiful carved cradle that had been used by 3 Morrison children. "This is too much," Eliza protested. "Nonsense. That's what neighbors do." Martha's eyes were kind. "I know you didn't have the easiest welcome to Clearwater. Some folks were quick to judge. But you've proven yourself, Eliza. The way you've handled the school, the way you and Colt run that ranch, people notice. They respect it." The other women nodded in agreement. Mrs. Patterson was among them, looking slightly uncomfortable but sincere. "I owe you an apology," Patterson said. "I made assumptions when you first arrived, said things that weren't charitable. I was wrong." Eliza felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying. "Thank you. That means more than you know." They spent the afternoon sitting on the porch, the women sharing advice about childbirth and motherhood, while Eliza listened and learned. When they finally left, she stood watching their wagon disappear down the road, feeling something she hadn't felt since leaving Philadelphia: community. That evening, she showed Colt the gifts, particularly the cradle. He ran his hand over the smooth wood, his expression thoughtful. "My father made me a cradle," he said quietly. "Spent weeks on it, wanted it perfect. My mother kept it for years, thinking there'd be more children after me. Never were." He looked at Eliza. "When I left for the war, she asked if I wanted it for when I had children of my own. I said no. Didn't think I'd survive long enough to need it. But you did survive. Did. And now here we are, about to need a cradle. He touched her belly gently, feeling the baby move beneath his palm. Life's strange. You plan for one thing, get something completely different, and somehow it turns out better than what you'd imagined. September brought cooler weather and the start of fall roundup. The hired hands moved the cattle down from summer pasture, and Colt spent long days checking the herd, separating out calves for sale, and preparing for the trip to market. This would be the real test of the ranch's success, whether they could turn enough profit to make the next loan payment and carry them through another winter. Eliza, now 7 months pregnant and moving more slowly, managed the accounts and coordinated logistics. She negotiated prices with buyers in advance, arranged transportation, and made sure every detail was covered. On the day before Colt was scheduled to leave with the cattle, she went over the numbers one final time. "If you get the prices we agreed on, we'll clear the loan payment with $300 to spare," she said. "That's enough to hire help for calving season and still have a cushion for emergencies. And if prices drop, then we're cutting it close, but we'll make it, barely." She closed the ledger. "Either way, we're in better shape than last year." He pulled her close as her belly would allow. "We did this together. Built something that works. We did." She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Come back safe, Colt. Don't take stupid risks." "I'll come back. Got too much here to lose." He left at dawn the next day with the 2 hired hands and 40 head of cattle. Eliza stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge, then turned back to the empty ranch with a strange mix of pride and loneliness. This would be the first time she'd been truly alone here since arriving almost a year ago. The first 2 days were quiet. She kept busy with small tasks, mending, organizing, planning lessons for when school resumed. She fed the chickens and the remaining livestock, checked fences near the house, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong on a cattle drive. On the 3rd day, Crawford stopped by to check on her. "Colt asked me to keep an eye on the place while he's gone," he said. "You need anything?" "I'm managing fine, but thank you." He nodded, clearly uncomfortable with this kind of social call. "You're looking well. When's the baby due?" "November, the doctor thinks. My wife's offered to help when the time comes. She's delivered half the babies in the county. Good hands, steady head." Eliza hadn't considered who would help with the birth. The thought of going through labor alone terrified her, though she'd been trying not to dwell on it. "I'd appreciate that. Thank you, Jim." He tipped his hat and left, but knowing she had that support eased some of her worry. On the 5th day, a storm blew in, not like the winter storm that had trapped them months ago, but fierce enough to concern her. Thunder cracked overhead and rain lashed the windows. Eliza checked the animals, made sure everything was secured, and waited it out. The storm lasted through the night. She lay in bed listening to the wind howl, thinking about Colt somewhere out on the trail with the cattle, hoping he'd found shelter, praying he was safe. The baby moved restlessly, as if sensing her anxiety. Morning brought clear skies and Colt's return. She saw the riders coming up the road and ran, as much as a 7-month pregnant woman could run, to meet them. Colt dismounted and caught her in his arms, both of them laughing with relief. "You're back early," she said. "Made better time than expected. Weather cooperated most of the way, and the cattle moved well." He grinned. "And I've got good news. Prices were up, way up. Buyer was desperate for stock and paid premium." "How much?" He told her, and her eyes widened. It was nearly double what they'd projected. "That's... Colt, that's enough to pay off the entire loan. Not just this payment, the whole thing." "I know. I already did the math." He touched her face. "We're debt-free, Eliza. The ranch is ours, clear and free." She burst into tears, hormones and relief and joy all mixed together. He held her while she cried, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances. "We did it," she said when she could speak again. "We actually did it. We did. You and me, together." That night, they celebrated with a simple dinner, but the relief and happiness made it feel like a feast. No more loan payments hanging over them. No more anxiety about making ends meet. They could plan for the future now, instead of just surviving the present. In October, school resumed. Eliza taught until the middle of the month, when her size and fatigue made it impossible to continue. The town council found a temporary replacement, a young woman from the next county, and Eliza focused on preparing for the baby. She washed tiny clothes, organized the nursery they'd created in what had been her old bedroom, and tried not to think too hard about the approaching birth. Colt was alternately excited and terrified, building a new crib when the Morrisons' cradle proved less sturdy than they'd hoped, and reading every book about childbirth he could get his hands on. "You're going to wear yourself out," Eliza said, watching him pace the main room for the third time in an hour. "I just want to be prepared. You can't prepare for this. It happens when it happens, and we deal with it." "That's not very reassuring," she laughed. "Neither is your pacing. Come sit down before you wear a path in the floor." He sat, but his knee bounced with nervous energy. She took his hand, held it tight. "We're going to be fine. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Women die doing this. I'm not going to die. I'm young, I'm healthy, and I've got you. That's more than a lot of women have." He squeezed her hand. "I can't lose you, Eliza. I know that's selfish, but I can't. You won't. I promise." But promises couldn't control nature. On a cold night in early November, 2 weeks before the baby was due, Eliza woke to pain that stole her breath. At first she thought it was just discomfort. The baby had been pressing on her ribs and making sleep difficult for weeks. Then she felt wetness and realized her water had broken. "Colt." Her voice was steady despite the fear. "It's time." He was up instantly, moving with the controlled urgency of someone who'd trained for crisis. He helped her out of bed, got her into clean clothes, and settled her in the rocking chair by the fire before riding to fetch Crawford's wife. Mary Crawford arrived within an hour, a competent woman in her 50s who'd seen enough births to be calm about the process. She examined Eliza, checked the baby's position, and nodded with satisfaction. "Everything looks good. First babies usually take a while, so get comfortable. This is going to be a long night." It was. Labor progressed slowly, pain coming in waves that grew stronger and closer together. Eliza walked when she could, rested when she couldn't, and tried to remember how to breathe through the contractions. Mary stayed calm and encouraging, while Colt looked like he might pass out. "Go check on the livestock," Mary finally told him. "You're making her nervous. I'm not leaving her." "You're hovering. She doesn't need hovering. She needs you to be useful. Go do something productive. Come back in an hour." He looked at Eliza, who managed a weak smile. "Go. I'll still be here when you get back." He went, though clearly unhappy about it. The moment he was gone, Mary shook her head. "Men. They mean well, but they're useless at births, too emotional." He's scared. "Of course he is, so are you. But you're doing the work anyway, and that's the difference." The night wore on. Pain became Eliza's entire world. There was nothing but the next contraction, the next breath, the endless cycle of tension and brief relief. She lost track of time, of everything except the primal process her body was going through. Dawn was breaking when Mary said, "All right, it's time to push." Colt was back by then, holding Eliza's hand so tight she thought her bones might break. She bore down when Mary told her to, rested when she could, and tried not to scream even though every nerve in her body wanted to. "One more," Mary said. "One more big push, and we'll have this baby." Eliza pushed with everything she had left, and suddenly there was relief and a thin, angry cry that was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. "It's a boy," Mary announced, holding up a tiny, red-faced infant who looked furious at being born. "A healthy, strong boy." She cleaned him quickly and placed him in Eliza's arms. Eliza stared down at this impossible creature, this tiny person she and Colt had created, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. "Hey there," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Colt leaned over them both, his face wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. "He's perfect. He's wrinkled and red and angry." "He's perfect," Colt repeated firmly. He touched the baby's impossibly small hand, and tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names but never settled on one. Looking at this small person, Eliza knew what felt right. "Thomas," she said. "After your father, Thomas Mercer." Colt's expression crumbled, joy and grief mixing together. His father had died when Colt was 15, and they'd never had the chance to make peace after Colt enlisted against his wishes. Naming the baby after him felt like a bridge across that old wound. "Thomas," he repeated. "Yeah, that's perfect." Mary cleaned up efficiently, got Eliza settled in bed with the baby, and made sure both mother and child were doing well before preparing to leave. "You did good," she told Eliza. "He's healthy, you're healthy, and you've got a good man here to help. That's everything that matters." After Mary left, Colt and Eliza sat together in the quiet house, marveling at the small life they'd created. Thomas had fallen asleep, tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. "I can't believe he's real," Colt said softly. "I can't believe we made this. We did a lot of things I couldn't believe this past year. Built a ranch, cleared a debt, created a life worth living. This is just the newest impossible thing. Best impossible thing yet." They sat in silence for a while, watching their son sleep. "I was so scared," Colt admitted. "When you were in labor, when I could hear you in pain and couldn't do anything to help, I thought about all the things that could go wrong, all the ways I could lose you both. It was worse than the war, but we made it. We're both here, both fine. This time. But there will be other dangers, other risks. Raising a child out here isn't easy. What if... Colt." She touched his face, made him look at her. "We can't live in fear of what might happen. We just have to do our best and trust that it's enough. That's all anyone can do." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I know you're right. I love you both so much it scares me." "Good. It should scare you. It scares me too. But we're in this together, and that makes all the difference." The first weeks with Thomas were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Eliza healed slowly from the birth, while Colt took over most of the ranch work and tried to learn how to care for an infant. He was surprisingly good at it, patient with middle-of-the-night feedings, gentle when changing diapers, natural at soothing when Thomas cried. The town embraced the new addition. Martha Morrison brought casseroles and advice. Mrs. Patterson knitted blankets and baby clothes. Even Crawford stopped by with a hand-carved toy horse, gruffly saying every boy needed something to play with. The ranch settled into new rhythms. Eliza returned to teaching in January, bringing Thomas with her to the school. The older girls took turns helping with the baby while Eliza taught, and Thomas seemed content to sleep through lessons or play quietly in his basket. Winter was milder than the year before, and they lost no cattle. Spring brought healthy calves and good prices at market. The ranch thrived, and with it, the Mercer family grew stronger. On a warm evening in late May, almost exactly a year after Eliza had told Colt about the pregnancy, they sat on the porch watching Thomas take his first wobbling steps across the yard. He was quick for his age, curious about everything, already showing signs of his father's determination and his mother's sharp mind. "Remember when you first got here?" Colt asked. "When you stepped off that stage crying?" "How could I forget? I was a mess." "You were brave. You'd lost everything, and you were still trying to move forward." He watched Thomas tumble and immediately try to stand again. "I didn't know what I was getting into bringing you here." "Having regrets?" "The opposite. I was thinking about how much has changed, how different everything is from what I expected." Eliza knew what he meant. She'd come here expecting to be a hired hand in a loveless arrangement, hoping for nothing more than survival and basic dignity. Instead, she'd found partnership, love, community, purpose. She'd found a home not just in the physical sense, but in the deeper meaning, a place where she belonged, where she was valued for who she actually was. "We were both broken when we met," she said. "You with your war damage, me with my ruined reputation. I think we expected to stay broken, just manage our damage together. But we didn't stay broken. No. We healed each other. Not completely. We've still got our scars. But enough to build something good." Thomas toddled over to them, demanding to be picked up. Colt lifted him, and the boy immediately grabbed for his father's hat. Eliza laughed, leaning against Colt's shoulder while their son investigated this fascinating new object. "You know what I realized?" she said. "That letter from Philadelphia last year telling me I was cleared. I thought it would matter more than it did. I thought vindication would change everything. But it didn't. No, because I'd already changed. I wasn't that person anymore, the one who needed Philadelphia to validate her. I'd become someone new, someone who built her own validation through work and partnership and love." She looked up at him. "You did that. We did that together. So we're both new people now. Better people, I think. Stronger for what we've been through." The sun set slowly over the Wyoming prairie, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The ranch house stood solid behind them, smoke rising from the chimney, gardens thriving in the yard. The land stretched out in all directions, 320 acres that belonged to them both, that they'd earned through sweat and struggle and stubborn determination. Thomas fell asleep against Colt's chest, worn out from his adventures. They sat quietly, not wanting to disturb him, content to watch the day fade into night. "I love this life," Eliza said softly. "Our life. Everything we've built." "Me too. Couldn't imagine anything better." "Not even the life you had before? Before the war?" He thought about that. That life was good, but it was somebody else's. This life is mine, ours. We chose it, we built it, we earned it. That makes it worth more than anything I had before. She understood exactly what he meant. The life she'd had in Philadelphia had been given to her by circumstances. Her education, her father's connections, the luck of being born into moderate privilege. But this life, this ranch, this family, they'd created it themselves from nothing but determination and trust. "Do you think Thomas will understand?" she asked. "When he's older, will he understand what it took to build this?" "Maybe not right away. Kids take what they have for granted. But eventually, yeah. We'll make sure he knows that nothing worth having comes easy, that the things that matter most are the things you work for. And that failure isn't the end, that you can lose everything and still rebuild. That too." They carried Thomas inside as full darkness fell, tucking him into the cradle that had been Morrison's and was now theirs. Eliza stood watching him sleep, this small person who represented everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built. Colt came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd found in each other something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. "Thank you," Eliza said quietly. "For what?" "For taking a chance on a crying woman at a train station, for seeing past the scandal to who I actually was, for building this life with me." "Should be me thanking you. You saved this ranch, saved me. I was just surviving before you got here. You taught me how to live again." "We saved each other." "Yeah, we did." In the years that followed, the ranch continued to grow. They added more land, built a bigger house, hired permanent hands to help with the work. Thomas gained two siblings, a sister named Margaret and another brother they called Jack. The school thrived under Eliza's direction, eventually requiring a second teacher to handle all the students. Clearwater grew from a small frontier town into a proper community with a church, a doctor's office, and even a small newspaper. Colt served on the town council, using his experience to help other ranchers avoid the mistakes he'd made early on. Eliza became known throughout the county as an exceptional educator, receiving offers to run schools in larger towns that she always declined. But through all the growth and change, the core of their life remained the same. Partnership built on honesty. Love forged through shared struggle, and the knowledge that they'd taken broken pieces and created something whole. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together on the porch of their expanded house, watching their children play in the yard. The original ranch house was still visible, now used as storage and guest quarters, a reminder of where they'd started. 10 years, Colt said. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday you stepped off that stage. Sometimes it feels like you've been here forever." Both are true. Eliza leaned against him, comfortable in a way that came from years of knowing someone completely. "I've lived more in these 10 years than in all the years before combined." "Any regrets?" "Not one." "You?" "Only that I didn't send for you sooner." She laughed. "You didn't know I existed sooner." Details. They watched Thomas, now 10 and already showing signs of the man he'd become, teaching his younger siblings how to rope a fence post. He was patient with them, encouraging but honest, traits he'd learned from both his parents. "We did good," Colt said. "With the ranch, with the kids, with everything. We did, and we're not done yet." "No, we're not, because that was the thing about building a life. It wasn't a destination you reached and then stopped. It was a continuous process of growth and adaptation, of facing new challenges and finding new solutions. The ranch would continue to grow, the children would grow up and face their own struggles, and Colt and Eliza would continue to navigate it all together. They'd learned the most important lesson, that strength didn't come from being perfect or undamaged. It came from surviving damage and choosing to keep going anyway. It came from finding someone who saw your scars and loved you, not despite them, but because they were part of your story. The sun set over Wyoming, same as it had every day for 10 years, same as it would for decades to come. The land that had once seemed harsh and unforgiving had become home, not through any softening of its nature, but through their adaptation to it. They'd learned to work with the weather instead of against it, to respect the land's demands while claiming their place on it. Inside the house, dinner waited. The children would need bathing and bedtime stories. There were accounts to review and lessons to plan, and a dozen small tasks that made up the fabric of their days. But for this moment, Colt and Eliza stood together in the fading light, grateful for what they'd built and excited for what was still to come. They'd arrived at this place as strangers, a damaged soldier and a disgraced teacher, both running from pasts that had tried to define them. They'd left behind the people they'd been forced to be and created new identities built on their own terms. In doing so, they'd proven something profound, that your past might shape you, but it doesn't have to limit you. That failure can be the foundation for something stronger than easy success ever could be. And perhaps most importantly, they'd proven that love wasn't something you found perfectly formed. It was something you built, day by day, choice by choice, through work and trust and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. The children called them to dinner and the moment passed. They went inside to the chaos and warmth of family life, leaving the empty prairie behind. But they carried with them the knowledge that they'd done something rare and valuable. They'd taken nothing and built everything. They'd taken broken and made whole. They'd taken fear and created hope. And in the end, that was the story worth telling. Not of perfection achieved, but of damage overcome. Not of easy happiness, but of hard-won joy. Not of two people who completed each other, but of two people who chose each other every day, and in that choosing created something that would last beyond both of them. The ranch would stand as testament to their work. The children would carry forward the lessons they'd learned. The town would remember them as people who'd contributed something meaningful. But the real legacy was simpler than all that. It was the proof that starting over was possible, that second chances were real, and that the life you built yourself was worth more than any life handed to you. On that Wyoming ranch, two people who'd lost everything found what they'd been searching for all along. Not in each other exactly, but in what they built together. In the work and the trust and the stubborn determination to create something good from the wreckage of what came before. And that in the end was everything that mattered.